Welcome to Season 3 of the Spotlight series, Don't Just Survive, Thrive. Season 1 was launched to help people through the pandemic by talking to a variety of experts about topics such as psychology, finance, and health. Season 2 focused on more work-related issues, including HR, marketing, and leadership. Now it is time for Season 3. Season 3 is centred on the IT industry, specifically tech startups. There are also career spotlights where I talk to senior IT people about the secrets to their impressive career journeys. My name is Nicola Steel, founder of JJP Talent Solutions, an Australian IT recruitment company. For over 20 years, I've helped tech startups and innovative SMEs to attract, recruit, and retain technical talent. I hope you enjoy listening. I'm delighted to introduce Rosie Attwell. Rosie is Artificial Intelligence Delivery Lead at CUA and previously was a Senior Innovation Analyst and Project Manager. She is also a show host on Tomorrow's Tech. Rosie, thank you for joining me on Season 3, Episode 12 of the Spotlight series, Don't Just Survive, Thrive.
Thanks for having me on the program, Nicola.
Thank you, Rosie. So, Rosie, tell me a bit about your background and your career history.
I've always lived in leafy Brisbane. After high school, I intended to pursue a creative career. I applied for both art school and fashion school, actually got into both, but decided to study contemporary art and philosophy. At art school, we were constantly critiqued on our artwork. Everything you produced was scrutinised, like how a chef produces a dish. Everything on the plate needed to have a purpose. I always remember some of my fellow students didn't just produce art, they were their art. Their art carried into their being. So one of my friends wore yellow. Another was so distinctive, she spoke and looked just like her art. I thought to make it in this industry can be hard, and you really need to be committed. Potentially, you can actually work very hard for a very long time and not be recognised. So after art school, I decided to move into business and completed a master's in marketing and advertising. Then when I left uni, I worked in digital agencies and pivoted to innovation in banking and finance. And I am now the Artificial Intelligence Delivery Lead at a small bank.
Perfect. That's a fabulous story. And so it's not just one pivot, it's several different pivots.
Yeah.
So you've got your academic background predominantly in fine arts, and then you took to more of a business focus with marketing and strategic advertising. So what really attracted you to the world of tech and innovation?
I love learning new things, and the world of technology fascinates me, particularly engineering and good design. Also, I'm interested in how human behaviour is evolving with the growing dependencies on machines and automation. When I actually applied to work at CUA in innovation, I was asked to describe what the world would look like in 2035, and that really excited me.
Absolutely. And also, tech can be really creative as well. Like when I talk to software developers and they talk about creating really elegant code, there is an art form there as well. And I love that aspect of human behaviour and that futuristic approach as well. So how did you find that transition from fine art to artificial intelligence?
The art world is very different to the world of AI and machine learning. However, one aspect I haven't seen change is the need for good communicators. Like when I present my artwork to curators and collectors, I use those same soft skills to describe what artificial intelligence is, what it is not, and what we can do with it to a group of, a board of directors in a bank. The content, yes, is different, but you still need to be able to conduct research, synthesize a lot of information, distill it into a concept. make the message clear and provide a direction and rationale. So my art to AI journey spans across 13 years. You're really getting the highlight reel version.
Absolutely. And that's really important, that the communication is key, whether you're working in fine art or whether you're working in AI and tech and innovation, which is really important. So, Rosie, over those, was it 13 years you said?
Yes.
So over those 13 years, what have been the main highlights of your career so far, would you say?
Yeah, I really enjoyed attending the Venice Biennale, which is like the Olympics in the art world. So every 2 years, Italy hosts the exhibition and every country selects an artist to represent them. The year I went, it was Vernon Arkey, one of my favourite Australian Indigenous artists. That would be one highlight from an art aspect in my career. Then I think as we move through getting my first job in business, I think at the time I submitted 60 job applications and one was for the role of a director in a digital agency. Luckily for me, the company was quite intrigued by somebody with no experience applying to become a director. But it was my foot in the door. And I think they were so impressed by the sheer stupidity slash or risk-taking that I did there, that they offered me an entry-level role in that organisation, which was quite a defining moment for me because, you know, it was my foot in the door. And then I think moving on from there in banking, working with the risk team to produce an ethical practice policy for robotics and AI was a really big moment for me. And I felt like I contributed to something that forevermore the company will use to conduct safe practices. And then also just from a project perspective, analysing historical data on human behaviour and seeing a human turn their life around, so to speak. Without knowing who the person was, I could see after a year of hardship, this person, whoever they are, must have found a new job and ended up paying off their entire loan back in full. And this, for me, was quite a special moment because it's a reminder that humans are unpredictable, but with the right factors can still surprise us.
And that was a real person. Obviously, from confidentiality, you couldn't give their name or anything like that. But
it was anonymized data, so I would never be able to identify who they were. But because we removed all of that data before using it, but by picking it up and having a look, it just we talk about outliers in the data, and for me, that outlier, that human that is the outlier, that sort of, restored my faith that you can go against the grain. And even though we can try to predict what will happen to you, suddenly your luck might just turn around or something might go well in your life. And so as much as we're trying to predict human behavior, I just love that there's still that surprise.
Absolutely. Life should be full of surprises. It should never be dull. And I love your bold acts when you're some, new person applying for the director role.
Yeah.
But be bold. If you don't ask, the answer's always going to be no.
After applications, you start to just really go for anything you can. So I probably reached a point where something needed to happen.
Yes, that's a lot of applications as well. But I guess that was, as you say, it was 13 years ago. That's a fabulous, and I love that trip to Italy, to Venice. That must have been amazing as well. Italy's beautiful. So turning it the other side of the coin, what would you say have been the main challenges of your career?
Well, you picked it up just before, Nicola, by saying, having a diverse background can actually make it harder to place you from a recruitment perspective. So if I had have kept marketing roles over 10 years, I just think that, that would have been easier for me to move through because there's a straightforward trajectory here. Another challenge that I found in my most recent role within AI is building trust with internal IT and data teams. Artificial intelligence can be a bit working in this realm can be a little bit political, particularly if you try to create an operating model where you sit the function in operations. And in my experience, data teams, can believe that AI belongs with them, and equally IT and architecture can believe it's a function that belongs to them. I was lucky enough to actually work closely with the continuous improvement specialists in operations. So I learned how to identify and validate problems in the business before suggesting we solve it using algorithms. Part of my role even included understanding more about a problem to solve for and actually telling the business why it wasn't wise to install or solve the problem using AI.
Mm-hmm. And it seems from both your career in the diversity and also from an AI data, etc. perspective, that the main challenges have been pigeonholing people.
Yeah.
I know recruiters like to do that. It makes their life easier. And I guess from a business sense, it often, that siloing makes life easier. As a recruiter now with many years experience, I love it when people have got lots of different careers because they've got such a rich history and they can bring so much more to the table rather than having a really linear career trajectory. So I think I kind of see beyond that, but I can imagine that it would be an issue because it's easy to pigeonhole you in a database. But I love, as I say, that kind of rich tapestry that people bring to the table. And what do you think are the secrets behind your success, Rosie?
Well, Nicola, I've read so many self-help books on trying to find the secret of success. So please let me know if you find this out. But no, I do think there are a few sort of tips and hints and ideas that I do sort of live by. Nurturing your connections is something I've always done. It's a lot harder to ask for help from people when you sporadically reach out to them only when you need help. Energy is another factor I think is really important. So for me, I know that it's really important to exercise in order to bring my best self to work. Some time ago, I read a book called Discipline Equals Freedom. And after reading that book, I decided to go to the gym 5 days a week for a year. And just to see what would happen and see whether it would have an effect on my life. And I can say it had a drastic and positive effect on my overall well-being. So now that's something that I put down as it's a must, a mandatory for me to bring my best self to work is the exercise. And then also I've been quite lucky. I've worked with a lot of empathetic people. Working with empathetic people can be uplifting and also stabilizing. Mm-hmm. Listening to understand what people want and helping them can have benefits over the long term. And I think it helps build community.
Absolutely. And I think you and I are very similar. We met at an event last year where we were both presenting. But I'd agree with you on all those points. Keeping your connections, well, that's my job anyway. But I really like that aspect of discipline or preparation, bringing freedom. So it's not being rigid. By doing that, it allows you to do more things just by having those simple habits, and they build upon themselves and everything. And having good mentors and dealing with empathetic people, surrounding yourself with people that bring you up rather than pull you down. So
yeah, and I think on that note, Nicola, there's another book that I'm reading at the moment called Atomic Habits, and it's on that note that you talk about discipline and habits. In that book, the writer talks about how if you stick to having good habits, it's sort of similar to how a plant grows. So you have the roots that form underneath, and initially it can be really hard, and that you can't see any obvious change that's come about. But if you stick with it, the roots sort of start to form underneath the ground, and then suddenly pops up a flower or pops up a plant on the other side. So it's sort of like you stick to it to sort of, ground yourself. And then I think over time, you're quite right, it does build up and can drastically, show that change and evolution.
I love that analogy as well. I used to grow lots of plants from their little seeds into the flowers and everything in the UK. I don't really do any gardening here, mainly because I'm frightened of spiders and snakes. But
Yeah.
but I love that creation and all that hard work, and then this beautiful bloom that comes out there. And that's a bit like people as well, that putting your time and energy into people, and then they bloom. So not just yourself, that habit. So coming back to artificial intelligence, what would you say are the essential skills for somebody interested in a career in AI?
I think for me, in regards to communication, I want to be quite specific. The ability to quickly understand the digital literacy of who you're talking to, and being able to adjust your language to communicate what you're working on so they can participate in the conversation. I think that so often you can walk into a room and start presenting an idea or concept or a solution, and you haven't taken a moment to also open up for feedback just to see, is that person following me? Because I could do all of this presentation and think, oh, yep, that's everything. I've covered it all off. But I've made a huge assumption that the other person is able to participate in that conversation. So just spending the time to know who you're talking to. Obviously, and I think you mentioned this on your previous programs and even on the panel when we were working with QT, but working at a company where the culture sees people openly sharing information, working in a company where data and IT strategy aligns with and enables the automation roadmap. So that's quite a specific one just for AI. Working at a company where executive sponsors seek to understand AI and programs of work are adequately funded with long-term goals in mind. Where I've seen it fall down before is where you want quick, fast, and good results. And with artificial intelligence and machine learning, potentially you could be doing things with your data that you've never done before. So having that short-term thinking of, well, if it doesn't work, then we're going to pull the whole budget. Or at least if that's the case, letting the delivery team know that so that they know, well, we're just going to go for, builds and models that will give us faster results rather than invest, say, 6 weeks of work into a 3-year build, when really, if you're experimenting and things don't work out and you need to put more budget into it, it doesn't come as a big shock. It's also worth investigating how to effectively manage change. So if you impose new technology onto people without bringing them on the journey or involving them in the process, it can feel quite threatening for them, and more often than not, you will see resistance in the change. And the last point I just wanted to make was to ensure that you think about ongoing costs for productionizing a model. So there's nothing worse than getting to the end of a build and receiving a mathematical result without considering how that result then translates into a decision that will then need to be communicated through some medium to a human so they can continue to do their job. So I'd say execution is everything. And yes, you might do some cool, fun things with maths and probability and machine learning, but until it makes business sense and you've actually converted that into a solution that can help humans then do their job, it's really more of experimenting, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it's about the people at the end of the day, the customers, whether they be internal or external. And I remember when we met for lunch sometime last year, you were talking about, is it a problem that actually needs to be solved? I can't remember the specific example, but you investigated it and realised that wasn't actually the solution. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so a team came to me and said, Rosie, we've measured the size of this problem, this business problem, and I can tell you it equates to 15 people in this team spending 60% of their time doing something that we think can be automated by a machine, and it's costing the companies, say, $500,000 a year. Is there something that we can do? Can we bring in, say, a chatbot to answer the frequently asked questions that team receives, because 60% of their work involves just answering frequently asked questions. So I thought, oh, well, you've got the data, you've got the problem, you've measured it, you've validated it, fantastic. I'm going to conduct my own analysis on the problem. So I spent 3 months with that team calculating every drop-in, every email, every phone call that they received to work out, is it 15 people spending 60% of their time answering all those questions? And what I found was it was one person spending 8 hours a week on frequently asked questions, whichever means they came in. So really it was about the equivalent of, say, $3,000 a year. So I was like, so you've come to me telling me it's a $500,000 problem, and I can tell you now it's only worth $3,000. So if we invested 100 or 200,000 into a new build and a new team that would maintain this thing, and we'd go through an RFP process and find the right partner, do you really want to do that with your money? If, what we could look at is what is the work that your team spends most of their time on, because it's not what you thought it was. So that's the example that I use, where I spent 3 months of my work just validating whether AI would be appropriate to solve that business problem.
Absolutely. And not just using AI for AI's sake and having all the shiny things. There might be a much simpler and cheaper solution, which obviously that's a brilliant example. And earlier on, you touched on ethics and AI. So what are your thoughts with regards to that? Because we can use AI for good and we can use AI for evil.
Yep. Well, I always think, if I were to write another ethics policy again, what I think is really important for companies to do is really investigate how humans make those decisions today. So, for example, to grant a loan to someone, you may use a combination of data which could include human credit assessors that go through transactional data. You might use Equifax credit score data. All of these methods involve using data to make an assessment, but how do you know the influencing factors, and how can you control those influencing factors? That sort of push-pull, like if I turn up my risk, if I turn up my appetite to take risk and I turn that down, how does that impact on my business? Can I even identify those factors that influence the decision making? Does one of the credit assessors have a preference to grant loan approvals just to people who have previously worked at McDonald's or live in a certain postcode? Because it has some sort of special sentimental connection to them and their life journey or their background. Do you understand how Equifax determine that their credit score? If you're using their credit scoring by their means to make a business decision. So seek to understand the thresholds of your business risk. Is the data skewed so that it positively impacts on some people over others? What techniques can be used to address or combat that issue if that's the case? We accept that humans can be wrong, but expect intelligent machines to be without fault. After all, is black box AI different from black box human?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So my former boss, Bridget Leishman, says, if no one was looking, would you do it? In terms of that ethical piece. If the answer is no, then you have your answer. It should be quite simple, but it often becomes very complicated. This also reminds me of the sentiment that came out of the recent Banking Royal Commission, which begged the question, just because you can do it, should you do it? Meaning, is it ethical or does it harm human life? So did anyone ever ask that before we just, we can do it. Yeah, no, we can do it. But should we?
That's really interesting as well. Just coming into real life, I was at my daughter's primary school assembly last week, and the
Oh,
principal asked the very same thing of the children. If nobody's watching, make sure you do the right thing, because everybody is kind of watching. There is always beady eyes on you, but having that ethics instilled at a primary school age is really good as well. Um, and sorry, I was going a little off point there. And your
that's
examples are very banking focused. But
yes.
there was a story. It was a few years ago actually, and I think it was a tech firm in the US, and the AI, it was supposed to stop discrimination, but they put in all the information, and most of the people at the tech company were called Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Adam, etc. I'm just picking out white male names.
Mhm.
And what happened was it had a bias to men with names like Matthew, Mark, Adam, Luke, etc. And so women in the recruitment AI system were being disregarded because they weren't seen as suitable, or people with unusual names from overseas. So the AI, through the data that was input in it, was being discriminatory in itself, which is brings up a kind of another um, is that ethical? I'm not sure, but certainly it brings up questions of discrimination, which
Yeah, and look, Nicola, to your point too, in recruitment, that's an interesting uh, area where AI can help in terms of scaling out decision making and getting to a candidate as soon as possible. Because the idea is you're trying to solve the problem of how can I recruit somebody very quickly with the appropriate skills, and how can I get smarter at it by using these tools that might help me do that. What I find interesting is where the world is evolving, where you have now tools. For example, you can add onto your browser, you can add an extension called this, it's called Jobalytics. And what that enables you to do is it uses artificial intelligence to, you can essentially press a button when you're looking at a job ad. It'll scan through the entire job ad and it'll highlight to you, here are the keywords. Then what it'll do is you can upload your resume and it will scan your resume against the job ad and it'll say, you've ticked off all of these words, these keywords, you're missing these 8. So what does that mean? That means now candidates have a bit of a tool themselves they can use to manipulate what's happening on the other side so that they can hopefully have an influence over getting that job. So what I'm trying to say is that even though we're using these tools in a business for operational efficiencies, there will always be people on the other side that will try to understand, what are these companies doing? How can I gamify their system? How can I gamify it so that I can actually fight back in my own way to give myself a fighting chance?
and that's really interesting actually, because I'm not a keyword searcher.
Yeah.
So just because somebody's CV is littered with buzzwords,
Yep.
I look at them with a human eye. But that
Mm.
said, a lot of recruiters do use AI and keyword searches, but I prefer to see the whole person, which is quite time consuming. But I
Mm.
think you, like using you for an example, your varied background,
Mm.
that using keywords could almost cancel you out because there's so much
Mm.
variety there. But as a whole, I see a really interesting person that could bring a new dimension to a team. So I think the swings and roundabouts, two schools of thought, etc., etc.
Yeah.
Um,
Good.
and sorry, coming back to you rather than me, is as a woman in tech, tell me a bit more about your experience.
I have experienced discrimination But I think things are getting better. I have been told that I don't belong in technology or the role that I've earned. In response to this, instead of feeling intimidated, though, instead of feeling intimidated and backing away from the industry or sort of shying away, it actually drove me to do more. So I signed up to mentor young women in AI in the Young Women in AI leadership program, and also apply to be a show host on a technology TV show. So this is how I'm demonstrating my passion and skill set to the outside world. But I think, like, very easily, if you feel intimidated, you feel like your voice is being silenced. And that really, for me, has kind of spurred me on.
Absolutely. So you're a bit stubborn then.
Yeah.
Me too.
All right. Well,
but it gives you that determination. And did somebody actually vocally say to you, "You are not right here"?
Mm-hmm. So I've had it in a few workplaces, and I think, maybe I don't look like the somebody that they've seen in that role before. I was actually just speaking to somebody who works in mining yesterday, and I was asking this woman who works in mining the same thing. What happens when she's working in a heavily male-dominated industry? And has she noticed being treated differently? She said that it's quite funny because when she goes to turn on a big piece of machinery, she notices that when she goes to turn it on, the men who are usually behind her, just, okay, we're watching the operations happen, they take like a meter step back because they're like, oh my God, like, we've got a woman doing this job. I've never seen this happen before. She's going to blow us up. Like, something bad's going to happen.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was a really interesting point. Like, that, it's just so new and obscure to see a woman in that role that, people are quite afraid of what's going to happen, even though if it were a man doing it, potentially, she said that she can see that if it is a man, they tend to all crowd in when he's turning on the machine. But in a different sense, it's sort of a bit of a safety problem there because they're sort of getting too close to the machine where, they really should stand back a little bit. But I thought that was a really interesting.
That is really interesting. I met a woman yesterday whilst I was stood in the queue for my coffee, and she worked in Demolition.
Oh,
And
wow.
she was quite a petite young woman, but she said she obviously starts her day early. But she has to go to the gym. And I said, well, you don't look like you need to. I'd just been at the gym. That's how we got into this conversation. And she said, but it's not to get slim, it's to get strong because I'm competing with these men and not competing, I'm working in a very male dominated industry. So I have to be really strong. But it was interesting just chatting to her. I've got no knowledge of demolition whatsoever, but she was really fascinating to just chat to whilst we were in the coffee queue.
Yeah, and look, I have noticed things where potentially whether or not maybe I've got a bias for looking for it, but where I've seen women maybe who work in IT and they have short hair. So maybe there's some way of looking a bit more familiar, or potentially because they work amongst a lot of men, potentially they've sort of done that, and that could be another unconscious thing. But there's that sort of survival. What are you doing to survive and thrive? And then, like that example that you've just pointed out, it makes me think potentially it's to keep up as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting as well because you're quite feminine in the way that you look.
Thanks.
But also, do you know Pauline Fatui at River City Labs?
Yeah.
So she's always worked in IT, male dominated, but she always wears bright colours, is kind of feminine in her look, but has had to kind of change her approach when she's talking to people to blend in as well. So I guess it's kind of blending in, which we all tend to do depending on the circumstances that we're in.
Exactly.
And how do you think the underrepresentation of women in tech could be improved?
It is systemic, so encouraging women at a young age to pursue STEM. I know that there's lots of programs and it's a real focus, so that's something that is improving, and I'm seeing a lot of visibility of those programs. Having programs that in place that really continue to nurture that growth. Women in tech doesn't have to be about women who are engineers, though, so it can include those of us who are involved in other ways, and just ensuring that those programs continue to exist so that women know that they have the option.
Absolutely. And I think in a way, this is a subject that I talk about a lot, to be honest with you. And it's the way that we speak to girls, that they've got to be the good little girl in the corner that obeys all the rules and what have you, whereas boys will be boys. It's having that different dialogue. And I'm not saying girls should be naughty as such, but be allowed maybe a bit more freedom. Rather than sitting there and keeping their dress nice and clean when they're little. And you mentioned as well, you touched on your show host role on Tomorrow's Tech. Mm-hmm. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, I didn't think it would be possible in Brisbane or for me to have the opportunity to combine technology and entertainment. I kind of feel like this program a little bit, you've managed to do that as well, Nicola. And it was a stroke of luck for me because I met with the production team to discuss artificial intelligence in general and in a banking context. And right at the end of the conversation, I just mentioned how much I love the show. And that afternoon, they said, oh, well, we've got auditions for show hosts, so, come along. And really the rest is history. Through that one comment that I said on the way out, they then responded to that and invited me to be part of it. So it's been a really good experience. I really wanted to do it to explore and push my communication skills. And I learned the script by heart, so it's always a very good memory test. I don't think I'm going to get Alzheimer's anytime soon because I'm always, it's like learning a new language. But the production team is amazing. Every person on set is highly skilled and wants to put 110% into the show. So there's a bit of an electric energy when you're on set. But I'm not going to lie, it can be stressful managing two jobs at once. But I think visibility is an important issue for women when you're trying to grow your profile. How do you stand out? How do you remain relevant or part of the conversation? Well, this for me was a perfect way to demonstrate my skills and remain part of the community on a more in a more visible way.
Absolutely. And I love watching your show and I follow it and everything, you and Samantha and the whole Tomorrow's Tech team.
Thanks, Nicola.
But I've got the Spotlight on Software Development series. And I love doing that as well. Mine's not as scripted. There's plans and preparation, but it is more of a conversational piece. But basically, Rosie, I love talking to people. And hearing their stories and hearing their insights and then sharing them. So that's fantastic. And it's giving you that visibility as well, which is fabulous. And I've got one final question. When I've been talking to you and when I was looking at your LinkedIn profile, you do so much volunteering. So tell me a bit more about your experience with volunteering, which I also love doing as well, and what really drives you to volunteer.
This is really how I make a positive impact to the world. Aside from working in a corporate job, I think volunteering can be good for the soul. So in 2014, I had a 1 year volunteering goal. So first I was going to walk 100 kilometres nonstop in the Oxfam Trail Walker in preparation to then trek to Mount Everest at the end of the year. And in doing this, I raised $5,000 in the first walk and then a further $7,000 in the second adventure. And it just helped me understand the role that Oxfam play and other charities as well, like the Nepalese charity Room to Read. I felt healthier as well, going on bushwalks all the time in preparation. I spent a lot less time on my phone. And in turn, the money raised from the 2 big walks that I did contributed to programs for ending poverty and enabling girls in Nepal to go to school. So it kind of hit a couple of goals in one, where it was combining exercise, travel, and I think I even started a bushwalking group called the Walkie Talkies. And the group that I did, the Oxfam Trail Walker, were called Holy Walker-Molies or something. So it was a way to actually connect with other people, whether that be through hiking or travel, or people with a particular interest in Nepal and helping there. So as much as there's a lot of criticism about how charities spend money and how they distribute the funds, I still think it was good to be part of it, because sometimes it's hard to know, how can you make a difference? How can you volunteer? And how can you, some people have criticized me before saying, well, you're helping all of these international funds, but what are you doing locally? So this year, or last year, I went and I was on part of the call center for COVID Connect, which is the Australian Red Cross initiative. Essentially, it's about reaching out to people who in remote areas who were experiencing isolation and extreme loneliness, and they put themselves down on a list to just have a call once or twice a week. And really, I had a set lot of questions. So I'd say, "Oh, how are you doing today?" And it was fascinating speaking to people on the other side, where they might be calling from Victoria or Melbourne, and they were telling me, a couple of things have happened to me, and hearing their life story, it really was quite a grounding experience. So, yeah, I really enjoy volunteering.
Yeah, I'm the same as well. I haven't done the massive walk that you did. Mine's more based around school and what have you. But you will be delighted to know, Rosie, that through doing this podcast together, I also love making a positive impact on the world, and I'm a member of B1G1, Buy One Give One, the Global Giving Initiative.
Yep.
And through doing this podcast, we'll provide a month of e-learning for a child in rural India.
That's awesome.
So making a difference, you just have to natter to me and you're giving a month's education to a child. So
wow, that's fantastic. That's so good.
Which is great. So yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for sharing your so much for sharing your insights, Rosie. It's always a delight to talk to you. And is there anything else that you'd like to share?
No, Nicola, I've really enjoyed being on the program today. Thank you so much. I think you're definitely exposing another side of me, which, some people, they like to kind of hide. They put out a version of themselves on LinkedIn and on social media that's sort of hyper positive version of themselves. But I feel like these sorts of conversations, we need to have more of these conversations where, you just sort of get to the heart of who the person really is.
Absolutely. And that's what I love, just talking to people and hearing their stories, warts and all, and everything. Well, thank you, Rosie.
Thanks so much, Nicola.
Thank you. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. Please remember to subscribe, rate, and review. If you're looking for career advice, your next career opportunity, or to grow your tech team, then please call me, Nicola Steel, on 0499 773 546, or go to our website, jjptalent.com.au. The Don't Just Survive, Thrive podcast is part of the Spotlight series, which includes the YouTube channel Spotlight on Software Development. If you want more insights into the software industry, particularly tech startups, then subscribe to the Spotlight on Software Development YouTube channel. Thank you for listening. Until next time.